From the age of 6, it was a household rule that after lunch you had to go upstairs and have a rest. I would have to go to this room and the sun came pouring in there and it was very, very warm, and I would have to lie in this single bed, not moving, with my eyes closed. I would be in this highly, so claustrophobic, red, hot space, like held in this tiny prison behind my eyes. After a while, I got to grips with this space, and I learned how to dwell in it. And this tight, claustrophobic, oppressive, hot space would become darker and cooler and bigger, until I was highly conscious but floating in this infinite, deep blue, dark infinity.
Antony Gormley is a sculptor. For more than 40 years, his work has dealt with what it feels like to inhabit a human body. In tonight's Imagine, we follow Antony Gormley through an extraordinary year as he grapples with past work.
Yes, yes!
And experiments with a new visual language.
I really believe this, that sculpture in its crude materiality can touch us and liberate feelings that we wouldn't know that we had.
In the late 70s, Gormley made a series of works wrapping found objects in lead. As the process evolved, he set aside these other things and began to make casts from his own body.
I am that object. And that seems to me an enormous advantage. I mean, it's so simple, really. I mean, you cannot ever be inside another substance as you are inside your own body.
I am simply, using my own existence and my own body as the model, the subject, the tool, and the instrument. But I'm not making pictures of it. My work is about what it means to inhabit a human life. When we close our eyes, we are in a space that has no edges, that has no dimension, that is immeasurable and is equivalent to the deep space of the cosmos.
Gormley's work has evolved to incorporate experimental techniques and materials. But the primary source continues to be his own body. Instead of plaster casts, Gormley now uses an infrared scanner. Bespoke computer software allows him to push the original shape further and further into abstraction. Today, I'm joining Antony and his studio team as they travel to see an exhibition of his most recent work, newly installed in Paris. These last few years have been enormously productive. Gormley now employs a team of assistants working across 2 studios in London and in the Northeast. All of the work in the exhibition's second body has been produced in the last 2 years. While some of the work may appear abstract, its point of reference is always the human body. In the 1st century BC, the Roman architect Vitruvius defined the proportions of the ideal human body in what came to be known as Vitruvian man.
Vitruvius says the head has to go into the body 8 times, that between the chin and the hairline is 1 hand's breadth. 1 hand's breadth is exactly this. This is putting space itself as the subject.
In the next room, a series of small ink drawings share a common idea with the enormous steel structures in the room beyond.
These are funny drawings in a way because they demand a certain precision, and they have to have a certain geometric accuracy so that you believe in the volumes. I'm just thinking about the darkness that you can't see inside those big cases. I suppose I'm trying to evoke both how it's constructed, but perhaps also what it might feel like. What these drawings are about is acknowledging the fact that we have a direct apprehension of the darkness of the body. What is that space that we inhabit when we close our eyes that is without dimension, without bounding condition, that seemingly allows us infinite extension?
Antony Gormley was born in London in 1950, the youngest of 7 children. His parents were devout Catholics.
We were christened with the initials AMDG, ad maiorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God.
My name is Antony Mark David Gormley, but they knew what they were doing. So it was an inference, not a, as it were, dedication. And that was a big weight to stick around my neck.
Hey, yeah. Great
No, but the thing
expectations.
is, then I went on to school, and actually you had to write that at the top of your prep.
And in a Catholic school, no one was in any doubt what that meant, obviously.
No, absolutely not. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam was just, one of those, you breathed it, really.
After prep school, Gormley was sent to board at Ampleforth College in Yorkshire, where he was taught by Benedictine monks.
Did you feel uncomfortable there, or did you somehow... I
bought it all, hook, line and sinker, because that was the only world I knew, and it was absolutist.
Your father actually organised pilgrimages to Lourdes, and you went there yourself as a volunteer.
Age 17, hitchhiked down to Lourdes, the shrine of Bernadette and Our Lady of Lourdes, place of miracles, where I worked as a brancardier for probably 2.5 weeks, carrying the sick, working in the shrine, undressing paraplegics, putting them into rubber harnesses and dipping them with full body immersion into the ice-cold water of the spring. Real suffering, and the illusion and delusion of the expected miracles. It just makes you very angry, I'm afraid. Well, thinking about it now, it's just like this collective hallucination. I think that sculpture inevitably talks about the big unknown of what lies on the other side of the horizon of life, so death. The sculpture deals with death head on. We're born into the world alone, we leave it alone, and in the end, we don't know what the next stage, having had a precious human life, is. I think the truth is that, and this is what every Catholic will say, if you were brought up a Catholic, you may lose your Catholicism, but the fact is that it has marked you for life. And the absolute need to replace its belief system with something else becomes your life's work.
This is Antony Gormley in India at the age of 23. The Catholic faith that had dominated his childhood was gone. In 1968, he went to Cambridge to study archaeology, anthropology, and art history.
I became aware of, as it were, the alternatives, and right from the beginning I wanted to experience those alternatives.
After graduation, he set off on the hippie trail, traveling through Turkey, Syria, and Afghanistan, until he found himself in India.
India was the beginning of everything in terms of making sense of my life and finding a means of doing so.
And you stayed there in India for 2 years, studying meditation with a Buddhist teacher.
I found that Vipassana meditation took me back to a place that I'd already known as a child. All of the historical, factual learning that I had been given as a result of a classical education fell away. I thought, this is a path that I could follow to the end. I could try to achieve enlightenment. And I think at that point I realized that this was in some senses an escape, and that it would be better to try to come back to my own culture and bring into it whatever realizations that I had had.
These experiences in India had already planted the seed for his first sculpture.
I'm looking at Sleeping Place. Where did that image come from?
At some point, I had all my worldly goods removed. I mean, they were nicked. And I lived on the streets of Calcutta for about 2 weeks without any money. All the world would be, you know, the shouting, "Chai, Chai, China!" The kind of, you know, the people with luggage and the rickshaws and the tuk-tuks all going. And there would be this silent, still, dhoti-covered body. You wouldn't know whether it was dead or alive at first sight. The image of these so vulnerable, and yet so pure shapes that are a form of architecture. Sleeping Place was a way of just bringing that back, making that experience again as an object. It talks about our need for shelter and security. It, in a way, also talks about what Plato said, that we will never know what is inside another person's mind, that there is, as it were, an infinity of possibility that lies on the other side of that skin.
Antony returned to England in 1974 and enrolled in art college. It was a time of great upheaval in British art. Carl Andre's notorious bricks had caused a public outcry when they were bought by the Tate.
It's a pile of bricks.
Michelangelo said, I think my sculptures consist in removing what is not the figure from the block of stone. Perhaps I've just taken the block of stone and not removed anything.
In 1978, as a postgraduate student, Gormley saw an exhibition of Carl Andre's work at London's Whitechapel Gallery. The exhibition was curated by a dynamic young gallery director, Nicholas Sirota, fast becoming one of the most influential figures in British art. 3 years later, Sirota gave Antony Gormley the chance to use this same space for his first solo show.
How did Antony present himself to you? How confident was he? Did he know what he was doing? What was he like?
He was someone who had proceeded actually quite slowly through his 20s and into his early 30s, gradually absorbing all these experiences of traveling in India, of looking at sculpture, of being at art school. And slowly this force was gathering within him. And within a space of a year or two, he formed that body of work we now recognize as being quintessentially Antony Gormley.
The centerpiece of that first exhibition is now on display at Tate Britain. It's made from 8,640 slices of Mother's Pride white bread.
I look at the bread and I think of the bricks and I think of this sort of humanizing of abstraction.
It is one of the first pieces that uses his whole body, here in negative form, obviously, but he ate the bread.
Oh, that's right, of course.
He ate the bread to create the form of his body. I mean, I think it was Antony's intention that he should take the most basic form of bread that was available in any supermarket. He coated each of these pieces in paraffin wax in an attempt to preserve it. But of course, There's a certain amount of mould has grown.
I see what you mean about tooth marks and stuff.
Yes.
Unfortunately for Antony, there were problems he hadn't foreseen.
Bed was the first work of mine that was ever sold. But on the day that they exposed it for the trustees to sign off the acquisition, somebody noticed this movement on the surface, and some conservator had a close look at this and declared that there was an infestation of Indian bookworm. And the source of the Indian bookworm was my bed, which had become a breeding ground for these little creatures. Anyway, and it was immediately, the room was isolated, the work was deacquisitioned and sent to Rentokil, where it spent a lot of time until all living life within it had been extinguished.
Today, Gormley's Bread Bed shares its space with works by Anish Kapoor and Richard Long. But in the next room hang works by someone whose role in his creative life was much more significant. His wife, the artist Vicken Parsons. She became a vital accomplice in the next stage of his work.
It's evidence of the necessary trust between two people. We did total body encasement, which meant that you were essentially bound, gagged, and imprisoned.
How are we going to get you out?
Along the gap between my thighs and my chest.
For the first 15 years, I mean, she was my primary assistant. She did all of the body molding and cut me out, and I've got scars to prove it. But I think there are a lot of myths that somehow, art is made by usually lone men on their own, who are slightly, perhaps, difficult. I just feel so lucky and so blessed, really, that I have such a strong supporter and lover and fellow artist.
And over the next 10 years, you made more than 80 of those figures in lead.
Lead is an extraordinary material. It has this density, this opacity. And then it has this extraordinary relationship with light, which is very like water. It absorbs light, but also reflects it. The common idea of alchemy is that you can turn lead into gold, but that's actually just a metaphor for turning gross matter into imagination, which is what art should do.
Gormley's work didn't shy away from the political realities of the time. In 1987, he made a site-specific installation that engaged directly with the conflict in Northern Ireland. He created 3 double-face figures to be positioned at key points along the city walls of Londonderry, marking sites of division between the Protestant and Catholic communities.
The work was an attempt to use the central image of Christianity, crucifixion, by making these 2 body cases, made out of ordnance quality steel, in other words, capable of withstanding the impact of high velocity bullets. And if you put those two body cases together, you look through the open eyes of one and out of the open eyes of the other. And my idea was to find 3 points on these walls that really made sense in terms of the tension within that divided community. As we installed the piece onto the Bogside site, this crowd of youths came out of the Bogside and started yelling. They started throwing stones, they were spitting at the sculpture as it was delivered off the lorry. It was hoisted up, literally dripping with spit, and these stones were coming across. And before long, all the windows of the crane had been smashed. The crane driver had run for his life. And at this point, a guy who was part of the installation team ran like the wind. Like Finn McCool, he had a hammer and he was just going like this, and they just all stopped in their tracks. I mean, it was a very extraordinary moment. That night, the piece on the Fountains estate was burnt to a cinder. They'd put tyres around its neck. So in the morning, there was just this incredible image of this entirely burnt figure. With something that looked very like the crown of thorns, but it was actually the wire from the inside of a tyre. Here was this image of the central event of the Christian faith that was equally relevant to both communities, being used to objectify this extraordinary conflict.
At the end of the 80s, Gormley began a series of works that led him to represent human experience in a totally new way.
This was really the first work in which I did have collective participation.
And each time you've made Field, you've used local people and local clay.
I just have to give them very simple instructions. You just take a ball of clay, form it in the hands, place it apart from you, make it conscious, give it eyes, and now see how a form will arise, and it'll be your form, it'll be unique to you. What gets released when you give a common collective aim to a group of people? And it is absolutely astonishing what happens. It's magic.
The first time he made Field, there were 1,000 figures. By the time he made Field for the British Isles in 1993, the clay army stood 40,000 strong.
The single figure is one thing, but it's the communal figure, the way it fills that space, which is so overwhelming, you know.
It's about, in a sense, our right to a voice. It is about giving a physical sense to those without a voice. These are witnesses that have no mouths, but look at us dumbly and judge us, we the living. What kind of world are you bequeathing to your children, to your children's children? I grew up properly in the late 60s, in the time of demonstrations. It's when sit-ins happened. We occupied the positions of power. And that's the point of Field. Field completely occupies the space of a museum to the point where you can't get in. And instead of, in some way, you having this pleasurable cultural experience, you are confronted by this accusatory gaze.
Welcome back to the Tate Gallery in London, live, where we are about to hear who has won this year's £20,000 Turner Award.
Congratulations, Mr. Antony Gormley.
It's quite interesting what happens to artists when they win the Turner Prize. Some sort of have actually sunk into relative oblivion. For some, it just reinforces whatever status they have at the time. I think Antony is one of those people you can say retrospectively, having won the Turner Prize, it really did kick-start his transition. In literal terms, he was able to do something bigger than he'd ever done before.
The Angel of the North is my attempt at a Stonehenge, isn't it? It's the attempt at marking a very particular place and a very particular time between, you know, the end of coal mining, the end of shipbuilding, the end of the industrial power of the Northeast, and the dawn of the information age, and making a totemic object for a community that had lost, in a way, lost faith in its own future. To use the same materials and the same purposefulness with which you might make a railway bridge or a large boat, but use it to make an imaginative object.
The motif of the angel had been present in Gormley's work for some time. They appear as hybrid creatures, impeded by their heavy wings. But he'd never attempted anything on this scale before. Not only was it the largest sculpture Gormley had ever made, at the time of its construction, it would be the largest sculpture in Britain.
I want my work to have a life. I want my work to interact with life. I want my work to be part of life. My hackles raise when that phrase is used. Oh, you make public art, as if that was some kind of second-rate, compromised, qualified, pure art. Well, I absolutely turn that on its head. In my view, all great art was made to touch all people. And the privatization of art is some aberration. I think the real proof of art's effectiveness is the degree to which it can touch people. Shift the tectonic plates of an assumption about the world, or open a valve in their emotional constitution that perhaps hadn't been opened before.
Its position just off the A1 near Gateshead would make it one of the most viewed pieces of art in the world, seen by an estimated 90,000 people every day.
I was concerned, is it going to work as a piece of sculpture? Are its proportions going to work on this scale? Obviously what one's most worried about is that it just looks like a small thing that's been made 10 times bigger. But I think the great thing is that it looks like it needs to be the size that it is, and that it works in the context. In other words, I'm thrilled, yeah. I mean, it's amazing to me that the Angel of the North is rarely alone. You see it always with the silhouettes of people moving underneath the bottom edge of the wings.
It hadn't always been popular with the local community.
And then one day, an Alan Shearer shirt finds its way onto the work. And what was your feeling about that?
That was just baptism in my old Christian way. I mean, I think that was it being accepted, because I can remember going to the Newcastle Brewery's charity evening when I was trying to get the Angel made and being booed off the stage. Get off, you wanker! It was an amazing sign of a change of heart.
For Gormley, the placement of his work is hugely important. Today, he's travelling to Lundy Island, 12 miles off the coast of Devon, to oversee the installation of a new work for the Landmark Trust.
First time I've ever been here. Well, it's perfect. And to be on a day here, on a day like this, where this extraordinary prospect where we look back onto Wales, back up the Bristol Channel, and then out west towards America. It's glorious!
You like it?
Isn't it? Yeah, I love it. It's just fantastic. What a sight, Vic. Aren't I lucky? I love the texture. This is just great. I think it needs to twist about 90. Up again. That's it. Okay. Oh, that's better, that's better. So, have we got a spirit level somewhere? Congratulations.
That's exactly what I did. Thank you.
That is bloody impressive. Don't fall over here, that's all I ask. So it's a long way down.
This bit of headland has been here hundreds of thousands of years, and now it's got this foreign object on it.
It's got to have that sense of it being, in a way, an irritation. But then at the same time, it's got to own its place. The test of a well-sighted work is during the time that it's there, you can't think of the place without the object, or the object without the place.
The emotional impact of the work transforms the environment in unexpected ways. From the seashore to the city skyline.
Event Horizon happened in London in 2007, and this was just a couple of years after the terrorist attacks in London. But there was a real sense of fear, and of a kind of quiet, sort of endless, everyday fear of, you know, people take off a rucksack on a bus and put it down and everyone is suddenly noticing it. That piece spoke to all of that fear as well. Are these threatening? Are they friendly? Are they alien creatures? What are they? And they were all facing back towards the Hayward building, which meant in a way that what Antony had done was a kind of clever reversal, if you like, of the typical relationship between the artwork and the viewer.
Blind Light was the name of the entire exhibition, but Blind Light was also the title of a work at the centre of the show.
The idea of Blind Light was actually to make you into a disembodied intelligence. You cross over this fully open threshold and suddenly you are in space. The light is substantial but shows you nothing apart from itself, and you are immersed in it. You're no longer moving through space with determinism. You are lost in space and light. And people would say to me, oh, I now know what it's going to be like to be dead. I'll just be like a thought in space. But at that point, you also become an image to people outside. But I like that idea, particularly when people were pressing up against the glass. It was almost as if they were sort of calling in their gestures for you to be there with them.
I think Blind Light was a jumping off point for many of the works that have come later, based around rooms and structures and journeys and paths through spaces. I think also the engagement with the public and the trust in the public to come to the work and bring their own bodies and experiences to it was revolutionised by that moment of the exhibition, when I think it really was a point where Antony moved further and further away from the object in a space to our bodies as the objects in the space.
These works begin and end with bodily experience. They're often about a lived moment, a space once occupied by a human body or a space into which you then go as a body. That's quite empowering because your own individual bodily and then emotional and intellectual experience counts. All sorts of ideas and associations, I find, start to reveal themselves. And of course, when you talk to Antony about anything, his mind, his imagination, it works, it pushes. He's never, I mean, he's the least complacent artist that I know.
Once you do that, suddenly the scale of all of this is infinitely changed. And then you can do this. And that changes. Oh.
This reminds me of something which is the relationship of what you do to other art forms, to dance, for instance.
There is no other art form that is that direct. To use life itself as your medium, to use this intense moment of being.
And to use a human body in ways that are so expressive and so different.
For the past 10 years, Gormley has collaborated with dancers and choreographers from across the world, sometimes making frames and props to work with the dancers' bodies. Or for Akram Khan, creating a surrogate model as a double to the body of the dancer. One of his most recent collaborations was with the choreographer Hofesh Shechter.
I mean, the dancer occupies a space just like your bodies occupy spaces, don't they?
The dancer's intelligence is about being in time. Yeah, when Hofesh is doing his rehearsing, it's just incredible. The embodied mathematics of the rhythm that he is, in a way, inviting his dancers to inhabit. It's so precise, but at the same time so intuitive.
What was amazing for me with Antony is that feeling that we could fly together. Like I felt, it was the first time I felt I'm kind of comfortable telling someone my dreams, my thoughts, my fantasies, unfolding the imagination together. Antony was curious about the bodies of the dancers in a very almost mathematical, kind of physical way, professor-like way. The weight of the body and how can you stand like that? What he demanded from them was sometimes kind of impossible. Not movement, actually, but being.
Everyone, Antony, to the front, please.
The fourth plinth in London's Trafalgar Square is the most coveted spot in Britain for showcasing contemporary sculpture. In 2009, Antony Gormley got his chance, and instead of making an object, he divided the time into a grid of hours and put the public on the platform. 1 person per hour for 100 days. To do whatever they wanted, as long as it was legal.
There was one woman on the first day, it was just so fantastic. I don't know how she'd done it, but she got kind of a Cuban mariachi band to come and accompany her. And she was doing it, and it was just wonderful what happened within the square. And then those people that took it very conventionally, that somehow Trafalgar Square was a place of acknowledgement of the fallen that had fought, you know, in the wars or in Afghanistan.
What other favourites did you have?
I know it's not fair to have favourites. I think my favourite of all was the agoraphobic girl. She got up there and she just formed herself into a ball. Well, you can see why I might like that. And she just sort of looked out at the world. Like this for a whole hour. And it was just, she was so small on that great big plinth and somehow quietly became the focus. I mean, it was really unbelievably powerful, beautiful.
And you're ready now, I think, to let go sometimes, because you...
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's what one another was. It was a complete letting go. It was just saying, let's think of art less as objects and more as a process, less as a noun, more as a verb, as a transformative space where you can dream.
Gormley hadn't moved away from making sculptures of a human body. In 2012, his work model was a figure made of steel rooms that the viewer could walk inside, from the toe up to the head.
What you seem to have done more and more with your later work is to allow us to have that same experience that you have when you were encased, you know, to find our way through space and to somehow experience the work in a very different way.
The show model was the first time that I'd opened the body as an experientiable architectural space. When you end up in the headspace, you're in this very dark chamber. You're almost in this position of being the consciousness of this collective acoustic environment.
For the summer of 2015, Gormley is creating a huge exhibition that will set his new cast iron blockworks alongside work of 20 years earlier. Every aspect of a show requires careful planning.
It's much easier doing it with this scale of work. Okay, there's our pile for Florence.
Gormley has been invited to make his new exhibition in a 16th century Medici fortress on the south side of Florence. As well as its Renaissance history, the fort was the setting of a landmark exhibition for the most famous British sculptor of the 20th century.
In the summer of 1972, the Mayor of Florence invited Henry Moore to arrange an exhibition of his works in the buildings and grounds of the 16th century Forte di Belvedere. It was the largest exhibition of his work that there had ever been. Writing to the mayor, he said, "No better site for showing sculpture in the open air and in relationship to architecture and a town could be found anywhere in the world."
When you took on Florence and the fort, you were aware, of course, who wouldn't be, that there was this extraordinary...
1972, Henry Moore.
Was the fact that Henry Moore had done that, was that an incentive for you to do it, or did it put you off?
No, I think it was obviously an incentive. And it was obviously also an invitation to do something very different. Florence is the birthplace of humanism. The whole idea that man was the measure of all things, that we were divine, that we were the masters of the universe. Human is a reality check when we strip away, in a way, the illusions of progress. What are we really? or what do we need to become in order to be truly human.
The Forte di Belvedere was built for Grand Duke Ferdinando de' Medici at the end of the 16th century. It was designed to command a defensive position across the city, but also to show off the power and status of the Medici family.
The Medici were an absolutely, I mean, Lorenzo in particular, was a highly scheming, completely ruthless man, who nevertheless had the first real art school for sculpture. The beauties that have come down to us from the Renaissance actually come out of a context of extreme pain.
For this new work in Florence, Antony has chosen to use figures that he made 20 years ago for a site-specific work called Critical Mass, built for an old tram depot in Vienna.
It was impossible to be in this building without thinking about the transports, particularly of the Jews. But that led me then to think about the mechanization of death. It's chilling. It's chilling if one believes in human progress, that actually we're still behaving in a very Paleolithic way.
For Critical Mass, Gormley cast 12 different body positions. He made 5 copies of each pose. These figures are deliberately displayed at odd angles, upside down or leaning against the wall. They are all without a plinth. Each time Critical Mass is displayed, Gormley arranges some of the figures in a pile.
I think of Critical Mass as my anti-monument to the fallout of the 20th century. Broadly speaking, the pile is history, something that we can do little about other than bear witness to it. But the pile is also bad history. The pile is the foil to any illusion of idealism that might be represented by the heroic statue.